What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy Honestly Bad Gaming here, and today I bring you the second devlog for this video. Again, for anyone who doesn't care about how I got to where the game is today, here's a quick clip of what's going on. So today we are going over a lot. First person control of the towers have been implemented. The first map design has been started. We have air and ground enemies, air and ground spawn points for the turrets to be built upon, and 2 new towers for anti-air units. Now let's get into how we got here and the next steps for this game. Now, for everyone continuing and not skipping off to see what was done, after the first devlog, I wanted to jump straight into the first person control aspect of the player being able to click the UI that says take control, and the player having full control over the tower and its actions in first person. After scratching my head for a while, basically what was done was I had to communicate to the UI that pops up on the specific node that is selected, and then have the game handle when the take control button is clicked. This took me about a total of 4 hours to get implemented, but basically I had to get the turret game object and its script from the information that is stored on the node when the tower is placed here, and then handle the connection between the UI, the node, the turret, so that the correct turret is being called to be taken control of. I started simple. Each turret will have its own camera object attached to the turret, and setting the turret script to have that camera set how the fire point object is set on the turret. So each prefab will now also have the camera object required for it to be used. Once the take control button is clicked, the script handles disabling the main camera object that uses for the third person enabled the camera that is the one that is attached to the tower. It was pretty simple. Then to be able to get off of the tower, I set a hotkey, which for now is pressing F on the keyboard, and it will allow you to get off of taking control of the turret and back into the third person view. Next, I had to tell the turret to go away from automatically performing functions like tracking enemies and firing, so the turret is just a dumb in sense, and the player has to do the inputs. After that, it was relatively simple to implement the controls for the script to lock the camera cursor to the game for it to be used as an input for moving aka controlling the tower, and now we are controlling the turret. The hard part though was redoing the whole firing of the turrets. Basically, I had to recreate the movement of the projectiles and the projectile script that are set to the prefabs of the projectiles to also show that, hey, you aren't tracking the enemy, go in a straight line from the fire point. Basically removing the variable of the factor 3 of the enemy to the projectile, which was simple. The hard part was I had to now set the collisions using the collisions triggers to properly deal damage to enemy tagged objects that the projectile hits, and then transfer the information like damage or AoE effects to the surrounding enemies. This took me the longest time because basically I had to completely redo it, as originally for the automatic version of the turrets, it was just comparing the distance value, which is a terrible practice, but it works, and then does the damage to the corresponding enemy based off of the vector 3 value that it had, and switch it to the collisions like how a shooter would properly incorporate a projectile hitting an object. But once I had all this figured out, we finally were able to take control of the turrets and fire at the enemies. By the way, if you want more in-depth information on exactly what is being done to develop this game, definitely check me out on Twitch at honestly_bad with 2 Ds. I am streaming the development of this game as often as I can, and you can watch me go through the steps and the struggles of all the complete development of the game. So go ahead and check me out. There'll be a link in the description. After that, the next big component of the game is having the air and ground turrets having separate spawn locations, and then implementing the spawning of ground and air enemies. So first I started with changing up the nodes to handle the differences of the ground and air turrets. First step was making the visual of the nodes different, so I started with making a simple platform in Blender for the ground turrets to spawn on top of. The design of the node, I'll go more in depth on why it is designed this way later, but yeah. Basically, when it came to the code, it was fairly simple. I created a clickable boolean to be seen in the Unity editor for the turrets to tell the prefab if the turret is going to be air or ground, but also added the building or the base option for the future implementation. When I implemented this, I had to compare the node value of which tower can be built upon it to the type of turret that is selected to allow the player to build the tower if the correct node is selected or not. I also went ahead and added the logic for the turrets when they are in automatic mode, aka not being controlled, to filter the enemies, checking to see if the enemies are categorized as air or ground as well. I used some of my current turrets to test this out and it worked great. It took me a little to work out the build manager script to get it working, but in the end it wasn't all that difficult. Next, it was to get the air enemies to spawn. This took me a little bit of time because I had some bugs because I missed a few steps, but basically all I did was create a new enemy type, in this case the air enemy, and then duplicated the current spawning of the current ground enemies and placed a waypoint in the air for them to fly over their respected route. Like the turrets, the enemy prefabs have a selectable boolean in the inspector to tell if it's an air enemy or a ground enemy. Then the script that handles the game loop for the wave spawner will spawn a wave of air enemies after wave 3 just for testing, and it works great. The turrets that are marked air will track and fire at the air enemies, and it was pretty simple to get working. Now that we have air turret spawn nodes and enemies, it was time to make the first anti-air turret. I found inspiration from a naval-like turret that's on battleships and went with that. This is another turret that I'm pretty happy with the design. I got to test out some new modeling methods in Blender that I have been wanting to try out, and because I've made so many turrets now, well, technically 2 at the time of making this turret, I know what needs to be done for every turret before it gets imported into Unity, so it makes the modeling a little bit more easier and streamlined. The new modeling trick came towards the end. I have like a belt loop like you would see on a light machine gun coming out of its ammo compartment feeding into the turret's cannon, or in this case the minigun. Eventually I want to animate it to make it look like that the belt is actually feeding the turret, but I think this will come way later in the development process, closer to the polishing stages, so we got a lot of time before we get into that. I got it imported into Unity, added some naval-like blue color to the tower, and basically first try on importing the turret, it worked flawlessly and I couldn't be happier. So basically at first my chat and I decided we would make the canyon in Blender, and after maybe a good 6 hours of working on it, I discovered 2 things. The first thing is this is going to be extremely hard to make, and the second thing was it won't be efficient in map building. Basically, the downside of doing this is during playtesting, if I need to edit the map, eventually there will be a incorporation of where the spawn nodes are for the towers, where they are included in the map for animation's sake. So if I had to tweak the map in Blender, I would also have to tweak these locations, but also completely redo the entire import process of the map and rebuilding the map with all the prefabs that go on it. After getting the first outline of the cliffs for the first map imported into Unity, these issues really showed its ugly side. So I watched a few short videos on using Unity's built-in terrain making tools, and I have to say it is so much easier to build the terrain using it. Plus, using materials to paint over different areas is so easy too. And if I ever need to edit the map instead of having to re-import and redo everything, I can just pinpoint certain sections and do it on the fly. For other aesthetic objects, they will be created in Blender, then placed into the scene, but for the general map layout and terrain, using Unity's built-in items, it is the way to go. Basically, I used the tool in the terrain editor to set the height of the cliffs so that the play area is all the same elevation, and drew it out so that it makes sure the enemy's route in the cliffs was ample enough for future development. I then set up 2 different heights to get the slope of the cliffs into the enemy route a little more smoother and looking more realistic. Smoothed out some of the areas, and we had the basic terrain for the map. I found some free for commercial use textures on textures.com and combined the 3 to give me a general terrain look. There will have to be some editing, but for now this is good enough so I can continue working on the general game mechanics and the gameplay on the game. One thing to note that I either didn't record or couldn't find in the VOD files for it, but I created a whole nother game scene so I can have the first quote-unquote map that I followed in the tutorial I followed for testing the turns and the future game mechanics, but then also the new main game scene so that I can work on the actual map and actual gameplay. In between the Blender and the Unity terrain map, I quickly duplicated and edited the ground turret node to have one that is aesthetically different from the air turret nodes to be more apparent to the players where the air turrets can be placed. This will be changed later on due to how I want the animation for the air turret spawning to look, but for now this is good enough. Lastly, now that I have a general map and layout, I decided I wanted to make one last turret before we get into the rest of the game mechanics and playability of the game. I had inspiration for another naval looking anti-air missile launcher, but it just never really came out how I wanted. This turret will be changed in the future, but I decided for now I wanted to have this type of turret made so I can continue working on the mechanics and have at least 4 different turrets to work on and get all of the other things you could do with the turrets created. I imported it into Unity with a little hiccup other than I'm trying to get the fire point better, and that's it. We are caught up to everything I've done with the game so far. So the next steps, and if you are seeing this video, I am currently streaming, so come check me out, but I'm going to start with completely revamping the wave spawning system so that I can toggle different difficulties and which enemies spawn on what certain rounds. So basically, in the short the run is I will have the wave spawner system completely revamped so I can test the enemies and actually build a complete level with what spawns on what waves and the different difficulties with it. But then I will also have 6 different enemies, 3 different ground, 3 different air enemies. So there's going to be a lot of blender and a lot of animations and such that are going to be coming with that. And then I want to start getting into the actual development of the upgrade system for the turrets and how that will be getting implemented with the buildings that are going to be coming soon as well. And depending on what's in the next devlog is obviously depending on how far I get and how fast I fill up my hard drive with video files. So make sure you subscribe, click like, and continue giving your feedback either on the stream or in the comment section below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this devlog. And of course, if you are as excited as I am for this game, make sure you guys follow along by subscribing or checking out the stream with the link in the description. If you want to go ahead and check out the previous devlog, link will also be in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for checking out this devlog, and it's been your boy Honestly Bad, and I hope you have a great day.